Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to have a whole programme dedicated to buying property in Portugal, and joining me today to answer your questions are Chris White and Carrie Marie Bratley of Ideal Homes Portugal. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well look, if it's okay with you, I thought what we'd start off with a little bit of a geographical or verbal geographical tour of Portugal. I think starting at the top at Lisbon and working on sort of way around the coast. If you could just give us a brief outline. I've only ever been to Lisbon myself, so I mean that's a very sort of strong city environment, probably not quite what you're used to, but it does suit some people. Some people do like to buy in a city. So if we can sort of start off at the top and you talk us around the coast perhaps.
Mm-hmm. So obviously everybody knows Lisbon, it's Portugal's capital city, and it's sort of halfway along the coast. So from north to south, it's geographically it's almost midway, and obviously Lisbon it's such a beautiful capital. It's probably one of Europe's most cosmopolitan, recently really became quite a trendy place to go. So from Lisbon, heading north, you have Porto, a very different sort of feel to Porto, much more original, very Portuguese, but still with a very sort of edgy, very cool vibe. Porto's also quite up and coming. Traveling south past Lisbon, down again the coast, the Alentejo coastline. So the Alentejo is between the Algarve and Lisbon, the region there. It's known for being a more rural region. However, the coastline, the Alentejo coastline.
Aren't the cork forests there? Is that the right sort of area?
There are, yes, cork trees and cork forests. However, you can find them a little bit all over the country. Obviously, cork's one of Portugal's most famous products. It's amazing what they do with cork nowadays. You can get everything from umbrellas to shoes to hats.
Well, I don't know how you take it out of a bottle, I'm afraid.
Also a great fan of that kind of cork as well. But the Alentejo coastline is interesting because recently it's become quite a very cool, trendy place to be. A very sort of upmarket. There's a strip sort of the Setúbal Peninsula, the Troia Peninsula down from Setúbal to the Alentejo coast. There's a little area there called Comporta, and just beneath it, Melides. And these are two towns that have had some very high profile visitors and investors there. So that's quite an interesting region. It's very up and coming at the minute. And at the same time, there's still very traditional hamlets. So it's got a really interesting mix of cool and classic, very authentic. And then obviously south again, you come down to the Algarve, which is possibly one of, if not one of the most famous region in Portugal, very popular for holidays, for its beaches. So yeah.
Now, just backtracking sort of slightly, what are the hot spots at the moment? You know, Spain, for instance, you know, you have Marbella or Benalmádena or wherever, and it's a hot spot. You know, everybody's going there this time or next time. What are the hot spots of the moment?
Lisbon's always been a very popular destination. However, in the Algarve, we are seeing two particular areas maybe, and I'm sure Chris might be able to back me up on this, but Lagos in the western end of the Algarve is very in demand at the minute and developing. And it is a beautiful city, historic and very close to the west coast, which is, it has its own following for a very sort of surfy lifestyle, very windy actually. It's quite breezy. It's on the Atlantic. And then towards the eastern end of the Algarve, we have Tavira, a very sort of Roman influenced city with a nice Roman bridge. It has, I think it's the city with the most churches in the Algarve, but that's also seeing huge demand. So I believe those are two very popular areas within the Algarve.
Yeah, I mean, the history behind Lagos is it was always notoriously quite hard to get to. So you didn't have the motorway, you didn't have the railway, and now the railway's in. You know, they've got the new station there, they've got the new motorway, or the motorway's been finished for about 15 years, but still quite new to us. Yeah. And that's opened up the whole area.
So flying into Portugal, obviously you can go to Lisbon, but to go to the Algarve, where would you fly into?
You'd fly into Faro.
Faro. And is that a good modern airport? Is it?
Yeah, so it's kind of new as well, isn't it? So they refurbished it about 4 years ago.
It was recently expanded to cater, because it's seen such a demand. It's been expanded to cater for the growing demand, more airlines, more visitors. So it's very accessible to most of the Algarve. You can reach it within an hour from most places, at max an hour and a half from either extremity. And it has a lot of flights intra-European, so to most major European cities you can get to.
Well, I see these cheap flights into Portugal. I always get very tempted, because I think actually the cost of a flight into Portugal is often less than the cost of a taxi from the West End of London down to here in Canary Wharf.
It's you can find, for example, visiting family back in the UK, people who live out in the Algarve. Personally, I've actually found flights for under €100, significantly under at some points, backwards and forwards. And it can be as cheap as travelling by train or going up the motorways with the tolls. And
it's like all travel, isn't it? If you pick your time and you just research it right, you can get it right, can't you?
If you're flexible, you can find great deals.
Okay, now just before we let you off being a Google Maps guide, temperature, what's the weather like? So again, let's go to the sort of northern areas of the coast, coming down the coast. Is there a big difference in temperature from top to bottom?
Yeah, very big. I mean, up on the Silver Coast, I mean, I've known it be as low as sort of 5 degrees, 6 degrees, so in the winter, and you get them hot summers. And it's called the Silver Coast because the cold Atlantic hits the coast. The coast is quite warm, so it creates a silver cloud in the sky in sort of July, August time. And then really down on the south, you get much more the milder winters. You can generally go without wearing a coat, so it's quite nice. The sea's kind of a little bit warmer down there, and you don't get them highs like sometimes you reach in Spain. So I always say in Portugal you can kind of live without the air conditioning for 11 months of the year.
Right. Okay. And as far as the sea is concerned, I've not really had much experience of seeing the Atlantic. So I've seen it from perhaps the Caribbean, and you've got the Caribbean Sea on one side, which is very calm and very beautiful and very sort of greeny blue, and then the Atlantic, you'd think twice about jumping in. Really, it's a bit on the hectic side, which I suppose is great if you're a surfer or whatever. But so, what is the Atlantic coast like as a bathing area, as a beach area?
It's generally the whole Atlantic facing coast is known for being choppier and cooler than obviously along the Algarve in the south. If you come further inland, the more towards Spain you go, sort of the eastern end of the Algarve, you do have calmer, generally warmer waters. The Atlantic coast would be, there are several hotspots along the coast that are famous for surfing. So the waves in certain seasons can be pretty big, and it's certain areas are very popular for surfing. Okay,
and in terms of the buildings on the coast, the newly constructed blocks, probably quite high rise, I would guess, as it happened in Spain. It always grows upwards, doesn't it, as well as that way. Are there any sort of protective features you need to look for in your building? Like, if you go and buy in a block in Miami, you're going to have sort of storm blinds, aren't you, and all sorts of protections like that. Is the weather coming off the Atlantic bad at any time of the year, needing care?
Not really. I mean, the building quality is generally really, really high standard. Most people who come from the UK and Northern America are usually quite shocked that the build quality is really high. I would say probably a few things to be wary of is I would make sure if you're buying a new build property, I would check the energy rating. So that's one thing to definitely keep an eye out, and always aim for an A+ or an A rating. Yeah. So that's things like insulation, things like the solar panels on the roof, which is definitely a must if you've got 300 days of sunshine.
Well, if you can't make it work there, you're struggling, aren't you? It's not like here. Yeah. Okay. So nothing really to sort of concern you to any great degree when you're looking at these buildings. And just finally on that point, I mean, we have NHBC here, which is a sort of 10 or 15 year guarantee on a new build. Is there a similar sort of guarantee system in Portugal?
Yeah, so they do an absolute minimum of 5 years.
Right.
And some of the builders that I've come across over the last 20 years actually do 10 years as well. So they don't have to, but they know that their build quality is quite good.
Okay, that's great. All right, well, that's all we've got time for in this portion of the show. So join me again after the break when we'll be asking Chris and Carrie Marie more of your questions. Hello and welcome back. Good to see you both, Chris and Carrie Marie. So carrying on with our conversation about Portugal, what I'd like to know about are the conditions for buying. We read in the papers that Spain has stopped what they call a golden visa, which I suppose, if I'm careful not to oversimplify it, but in essence means that if you buy a property, you make an investment at a certain level, you're given the automatic right to reside permanently without having to renew every couple of years and that sort of thing. So what are the basic conditions in Portugal in terms of visa requirements? I mean, presumably I can visit for holiday for 3 months or 6 months now. I don't know what it is, but there'll be a holiday period, won't there? But of course, once you step over that mark, you've then got to be very careful about staying in line and not getting huge fines and refuse the chance of a visa later because you haven't behaved. Mm-hmm. So what's your advice on visas?
I mean, there's so many different options available. So probably the most popular one would be something called the D7 visa. So if you go over that 90-day period and you want to stay longer, then I would explore the D7 visa. It's a very kind of simple process, but you do need a professional to hold your hand. I would always recommend speaking to a lawyer over in Portugal. Yeah. They'll take you through the process. I've seen that done within 30 days, 60 days, and it's relatively straightforward. The Portuguese do want you to move to their country. And
yes, I was a bit puzzled with the sort of Spanish idea, really. I mean, there's a country that's made a whole economy built on holiday makers and people buying property there, and they seem to have just killed it in one fell swoop, don't they?
I think Portugal's definitely coming up trumps with the amount of money required. So the residual income that you need per year is under €10,000. So you can quite easily do that with a pension or with income from property investment.
Yeah. Now, I take the point entirely that you said either get a lawyer to look at this or a visa specialist. I think that's good and proper advice. But would you recommend to use one in this country or in Portugal?
Personally, I would, as a professional, I would definitely say it's better to use one in Portugal. Pick a good law firm, someone who's got a good reputation, maybe research 2 or 3, and then arrange some Zoom meetings, and then go through that process.
Would that end up being your conveyancing lawyer as well?
Yes, it could be. I would probably use the same person for both things.
Yeah, because it all has to be tied in terms of timing, doesn't it? You don't want to end up there with a beautiful villa or a beautiful flat and find you got to be out in 3 months. Mm-hmm. And you can't come back. Yeah. But that's also, again, quite interesting. You're saying that it's a feature of the sort of Portuguese economy that they want you to move there. I mean, some countries in Europe now seem to be almost, turning people away, as it were. And I find that very strange. I've always liked the movement around Europe. I think it's great. I think it's great for kids who are at uni to be able to take a year off and go and study somewhere else and see a different culture. So I think that's very encouraging that you say that the government are keen to have you there.
I mean, when I applied for mine, which was about 6 years ago, just probably when Brexit happened, I remember I had this feeling that, is this going to happen? Ended up going to the local government office, took 3 minutes. They do something called your biometrics, and then you get the residency card. And now every time I fly in and out of Faro or Lisbon, just show that card and you don't get your passport stamped.
Yeah. And how long does that last for? How long is it valid for?
I'm pretty sure it's 10 years.
10?
10 years.
Yeah. Again, I know in sort of the Middle East, some of the UAE countries were sort of very tight on it only lasting a couple of years or something. And you know, if you've just settled in a new country, you've got enough to cope with, haven't you? Settling down, getting involved in the culture, understanding the different ways. I mean, I know when I used to work in Spain, you know, I used to go, oh no, you know, somebody says, well, where's the post office, you know, and they sort of say, well, there isn't one, you know, you go there, and they sort of say, well, you know, where do I put my garden shed? And you say, no, you don't have a garden shed in the development, it's all handled for you. You know, getting all these things done is quite stressful for some people, especially, I guess, if they're retiring there. So to know that you've got a 10-year stretch on your visa, I would think is quite comforting. Yeah. I think I know what you're going to tell me. You're going to tell me use a specialist, but I'm going to ask you if you just do happen to know, are there any specific requirements, for instance, if you're going to retire there? Again, is that like Spain or Italy, where you have to show a certain amount of income that's stable, or a certain amount of savings? Or
Yeah, I mean, the Portuguese government want to know that you've got a stable income on a monthly basis. They also want to make sure that you've got medical insurance. You are eligible for healthcare as well, but they do require private medical insurance to be on the safe side. You need a few other certain things, like you need a tax number, so a fiscal number. Again, I would definitely recommend using the lawyer to do that. It can be a bit of a tedious process. So get the lawyer to do that, and then open a bank account.
right.
And then all the other little details, like purchasing a car, looking for the perfect hospital, getting checked in with a doctor, that can all be done quite gradually.
Okay, and you say you are entitled to some healthcare anyway, are you?
Yes.
How does that work?
Well, there's an age-old agreement between Spain and Portugal that was set up in one of the world wars, and it's never been revoked. So they do charge you a nominal fee. Like, I had a friend who fell off a ladder, and he went to go get his arm reset, and he had to pay €12 towards the sling and the equipment. So yeah, a bit of a nominal fee, but he said an amazing service.
Didn't charge him an arm and a leg.
No.
Okay, sorry. Couldn't resist that. Okay, so well, that's quite comforting, isn't it? And is health insurance expensive in Portugal?
Not terribly. I mean, I pay about €400 for the year.
Right.
Which
Well, that's quite reasonable, isn't it? I mean, you could end up paying that here a month, couldn't you, if you're not careful? I mean, it's quite a thing. So, I mean, I think we've sort of covered that area of now. We've said it's, you know, it's relatively easy to buy. The visas are, you know, not an endurance or an aptitude test. They're something that they want to give you, and there's something that you want, and that perhaps the conditions for living in Portugal are not that stringent in terms of what you've got to comply with. So I think that's all great news. Now, what I want to move on to next is how involved you guys are in that. So I come to you as somebody, I've perhaps seen an advert of yours on the internet or something. I've got a lovely picture, got a lovely coastal view or something, and I'm thinking, is this real? How much are you going to help me? What are you going to do for me?
So the first step, I mean, would be you'd speak to one of our team who's based in Portugal. So we've got quite a big team of people. So they would take a phone call, maybe book in a Zoom call, and then discuss your requirements, check that we've got what you're looking for, and take you through the options. And then we'd fly you out to Portugal, take you on a tour of the coastline. So
what do you mean you'd fly me out to Portugal? You'd pay for it?
No, you have to pay for your flight.
Okay.
But then we'd pick you up from the airport.
Got you.
And usually I say we do like a 3-day, 4-day tour.
Okay.
Explore the east, central, west, and really find out what you're looking for.
Yeah. But like good agents all over the world, I suppose, really, the first thing is to qualify your applicant, isn't it? And the basic thing is to understand what they really want. I mean, there's nothing so frustrating as you go on a website with an agent and you say, I like that's a 2-bedroom property, and they go, yeah, but we've got this one and it's a 4-bedroom, and I said, I don't want a 4-bedroom house, I want a 2, fact is they haven't got one. But that brings me to my next question to you. I know, again, in certain countries, and the sort of Americas and Caribbean are a little bit like this, once you register with an agent, when you fly into the country, you're obliged to stay with that agent. Are there any such regulations in Portugal? And how much do you share your properties? Would I see the same properties you've got with another agent, or do you only deal in exclusive properties to your company?
So we've got our own properties, and then we share with other agents. So
Okay.
we're currently working with about 30 different agents in the Algarve.
That's good, yeah.
So we want to give people the choice.
Yeah.
And you don't have to stay with just one particular agent. You've got the freedom to choose the best ones that suit you.
Okay, well that sounds very good. As I've said, in my experience, the worst thing you can have is an agent trying to push something on you that you're not the slightest bit interested. You're just wasting time. And if you're on a 3 or 4 day inspection flight, your time's valuable, and so is the time of your client, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
And this is why also a lot of work goes into different events that we participate in to meet people, to try and help them. Because not everybody who decides they'd like to move to Portugal has a clear idea in mind of what's available or of what meets their needs, of what they require, until you actually get out there. And the property market is so varied now. There are so many different options. So it really boils down to trying to do your research into the different areas, what it is that you want from your new life abroad, and trying to pinpoint where you'd like to be, and then looking at what's available in those areas.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'll just say very quickly before we go to another break. I mean, I know you're actively involved in showing at the Excel down here, which is great, because do you know what? I've done it myself. I bought property abroad, and you meet somebody here, you talk to them about it, perhaps meet you at a show like the Excel or whatever. But do you know, you can't imagine the relief when you get off a plane, say in Portugal, and it's the same 2 people or the same 1 person that you're meeting that you met in London. It's so comforting and gives so much confidence. And I think when you're selling properties in a country for either expats or people who are going to make a new life there, I think that feeling of comfort and understanding and knowing your agent is so important.
And also to know that some of those agents have actually been through that process themselves. So they can give you the first-hand detail of the process. And actually, even though there may be parts of it that sometimes they may be a little bit challenging if things don't go according to plan, expectations time-wise, or if there are certain setbacks with bureaucracy. But to hear that other people have overcome that and been through it, and the life that they're living now, it's very reassuring to have that first-hand experience.
All right, well, thank you. Join me again after the break when we'll explore a bit more of Portugal. Hello and welcome back to Property Question Time with Chris White and Carrie Marie Bratley of Ideal Homes Portugal. I'm Stephen Galpin, and we're going to carry on exploring Portugal's famous beaches and seaside resorts. So coming down to where your operation is and your speciality of knowledge is, we're talking about the Algarve. I think most people have heard of the Algarve. It's nothing new, is it? It's been famous for many, many years. But I think, if I'm right in sort of saying, I think there are 2 sort of divisible areas. One is the sort of golfing areas, where people are engaged in sport and have properties associated perhaps with the golf course. And then, of course, the beach areas. And there must be quite a difference between the 2.
Well, I'm going to have to maybe disagree slightly, because the Algarve is so much more nowadays than there was a time maybe when it was best known for its golf and its beaches, but nowadays it's so much more dynamic, so many different varieties of activities.
Am I going to want to go when you finish?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, right.
In fact, we're leaving this afternoon.
Okay.
So the way we try to describe the Algarve is there are 3 general areas. So you'd have the eastern end, the western end, and a central segment to the Algarve. And in a very brief description, the western end would possibly be the more urbanized, slightly larger cities, and leads onto the west coast. A lot of the most famous beaches, the best known beaches, would be in that area. with the dramatic red cliffs that back these golden beaches that we see on the magazines and the brochures. So that would be that end. The eastern end is a more unspoilt end, a more traditional end, so perhaps not as well known as the western end. And in the centre would be where you find Faro Airport and some of the better known resorts. So Quinta do Lago and Val do Lobo, which are the quite well known exclusive postcodes. That would be in that area. And you are correct, there are a lot of very high class golf courses, so award-winning.
Let me just pause you there. Let's stay in the west then for a little bit. So that would be the most easy in terms of access from the airport, I presume. Then
technically, the central region would be immediately accessible to the airport, so that's on the doorstep. So Faro would be a very short, maybe 20-minute drive from bigger cities like Lulé and the resort areas that I mentioned earlier. To the western end, to the bigger cities, Portimao is a well-known city in the western end, or Lagos. You're probably looking at just under an hour to Portimao, just over an hour to Lagos down the motorway. But the access is very straightforward. So from the airport, it's a short 15-minute drive onto the motorway through the city.
Are they toll roads? Are they?
Yes.
Motorways.
Yes, they are. At the moment, they are toll roads. Different rent-a-car companies have different procedures for how visitors would cope with the tolls. But for the locals, there are currently tolls on the motorways.
So if you have a hire car, does that have an automatic exemption or something, does it?
To be honest, I'm not entirely sure how the procedure is at the minute for the rent-a-cars.
Okay.
But the process for paying the tolls is not a complicated one. It's normally taken care of.
Okay. Now, the other question I was just going to ask you, you mentioned these beautiful red cliffs.
Mm.
How accessible are the beaches? I mean, we've got some lovely beaches in this country, but they have got cliff faces right next to them, and they're quite actually difficult to get to.
The Algarve has done some amazing work in accessibility for people with the mobility problems.
Okay.
So there will be beaches that inclusive have equipment for people that might not necessarily otherwise be able to go into the sea that they can do. There are specific beaches with excellent access conditions to be able to get onto the beach. So you do have lots of beaches with steps to them. Where there are cliffs, there will be steps. Some beaches have elevators down to them, and other beaches, more towards the eastern end, possibly would be the flatter, more expansive beach with the direct, easy access onto them.
I'm just getting the feeling from you. We were talking earlier about visas and conditions for getting a visa and how quick they were to get, and how welcoming Portugal is to a property investor, whether it be for holiday or investment, I suppose. But you now talk about these facilities at the beaches. Well, we don't do anything like this in this country, do we? So I'm getting the feeling of a very sort of welcoming sort of atmosphere, which is really welcome. Yeah. It's good to hear. And it's good to hear that these facilities are there for people who are a little less fortunate than ourselves. I think that's really great, and it just adds to the whole worth of the place, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And as I said, a lot of work has been put into making it an all-inclusive, accessible region, and it has so many enjoyable activities for everybody, that there are different equipments in place to make sure that as many people as possible can enjoy the region to the full.
Okay, well, you told me off because I said it was all beaches and golf. So what else have we got?
I mean, one of my favourite places would be Silves. So Silves Castle, go up there and go on a Sunday afternoon, the music playing, the food. We have the medieval festival, which is fantastic. We've got the carnival in Lulé. Lulé is a beautiful city. So yeah, there's quite a lot more to it. I mean, walking around Faro on a Sunday afternoon, having a pastel de nata, a cup of coffee, a glass of wine, a glass of port. There's some all-you-can-eat restaurants, which typically don't have a great name, but we've got some with fresh fish. You go there, you pay a set amount, and they just roast the fish and barbecue the fish in front of you, and that just keeps coming. So yeah, there's lots revolving around food, isn't there, Carrie?
Lots revolving around food, and obviously Portugal is a major wine growing country, so there's lots of nice wines to enjoy. The Algarve itself has some up and coming wineries and produces its own wines as well. So they're exciting to discover. But there are also different activities in as much as there is an airdrome. You can go skydiving. It's a huge skydiving hub. There's a racetrack where they have the international races on, motorsports races. All year round, there are different events staged in different municipalities. So festivals, plenty of different.
Let's just come back to the food for a moment. So obviously fish is a feature because it's a fishing area, isn't it? Mm-hmm. What other sort of local foods are popular?
Oh, the big one, probably the most famous one, is piri piri chicken. So if you go down to Gia, it's got some of the best piri piri chicken places in the world. The chicken's actually a little bit smaller. It's very natural. It's organic, but you get that beautiful sauce, homemade French fries, typically a tomato salad. So that is the dish for Portugal, and you can pick that up for €6-7. Really? They do a menu of the day. My little local restaurant have a menu of the day for €8.95. Includes a glass of wine, a cup of coffee, or a dessert at the end. So yeah, so food's still, prices have risen around the world, but food's relatively inexpensive in restaurants.
Well, that was one of the questions I was going to come to sort of next. Is those terrible words, cost of living? What's it like? Has it shot up like it has here, or?
Possibly wouldn't say shot up. It's gradually climbed. Obviously, things are not the same price. I've been in the Algarve 30 years over, and obviously the prices have changed significantly sort of over the past 10, 15 years. But in comparison to other popular sort of comparable destinations, the cost of living in the Algarve is still relatively affordable. You can...
Well, if Chris's costs are right on the menus, it sounds very good, doesn't it? It sounds very good indeed. What about things like energy costs? If you've got a decent flat that's going to need perhaps air conditioning running a lot of the time?
I would say typically electricity runs in the region of around about €120 per month. Water bills usually between €5 and €25 per month. The biggest difference compared to the UK would be council tax. Right. So on my personal house, we pay about €330 for the year. So it's not something that ever, becomes such a big problem.
I've got a flat here and I pay $3,500. I think.
Ouch. I mean, there's a downside to the council tax, which is you do have to take your own rubbish to a central bin system. Yeah. But again, it's one of them things you put up with.
Next question, typical property costs. I mean, if we can say start with a 2-bedroom flat and move on to perhaps a small villa and a larger villa. Can you give me some examples?
Yeah, so I'd say sort of in the centre, the Golden Triangle area, we're seeing prices reaching quite a peak really. I mean, new 2-bed apartments in Villamor are now reaching over €1 million. So that's got a little bit expensive. Then if you go towards Albufeira, you're probably picking up the same property for half the price, probably around about 500,000-600,000. Go down to Lagos, that's risen a little bit. So, I mean, or a lot, I would say something that typically costs you 300,000 would now be up at 550. I would say the Eastern Algarve, I mean, you can get a beautiful 2-bed apartment with a sea view, brand new, with the build guarantee for probably around about 300,000. And then there's some property hotspots, like bank repossessions, you can still get them. We came across one that we're looking at the moment, and they've got property bank repossessions from 155 for a 1-bed, so relatively good.
But of course, if you did buy something like a repossession, presumably you'd be on your own in terms of guarantees, and there'd be a slight downside, wouldn't there?
Yeah, I mean, normally a bank repossession, I've purchased a few, I'm a property investor. I've purchased over 100 actually. And there's usually problems like air conditioning's missing, you have to get painting work done. So you do need a reputable agent who can recommend all them services.
And when you ever get anybody in to do retrospective work, it's always a question of that's going to be expensive. Yeah, but that's the way it goes. Okay, and just in terms of the market in general, is it a hot market at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hot market for sellers. It's hard if you're a buyer. I would say you kind of have to be patient, keep an eye on the market, keep an eye in the chosen area, really do your research and get yourself ready. I mean, I would definitely explore finance options, mortgages from only 2.9%. That's definitely a big buying point.
Okay, well, we're going to go to a break now and we'll discuss mortgages and purchase costs after the break, and sit tight, I'll be back. So join me again after the break. We'll be asking more questions on Portugal. Hello and welcome back to Property Question Time with Chris White and Carrie Marie Bratley of Ideal Homes Portugal. Now, just to finish off the final sector of the show, I'm going to be asking Chris and Carrie Marie about the costs of buying in the Algarve and what you're letting yourself in for in terms of taxes or little surprises that usually come when you buy property, I think. Same all over the world, I'm afraid. Okay, so let's take again a 2-bedroom flat. It's probably got a communal pool, etc. What would be a typical service charge for that to the developer per annum?
So typical 2-bedroom apartment with just a pool, maybe an outside pool, would be in the region of around about €80 per month.
Right, that's €1,000 a year, isn't it? Odd.
Yeah.
So that's what, £750 a year probably?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, okay. Well, that seems pretty reasonable. And that would take care of all the communal gardens, the pool and the general cleaning up around the building, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, we have a few developments where they've got, like an indoor gym, indoor pool.
Yeah.
They usually settle at around about €150 a month.
Yeah, okay. Well, as I've learned to my cost in the London market, the more facilities you have in the building, the more it's going to cost, unfortunately, and that's the way of life. It all seems great at the time, but when you haven't used it for a year or so, you start to begrudge the money, don't you? But I think it's very important people do take into account these running costs when they buy abroad, because they probably, if they're buying for just a holiday use, don't forget you've got your property over there, which is incurring costs every month, reasonable or not. But of course, you've got your own costs at home to cope with as well. And I think it's very important to take that into account. And I would guess as good agents, you'll be only too keen to show people what they're sort of letting themselves in for, because it's vital, isn't it? Otherwise, it causes bad feeling later down the line, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's good news on the service charges. What about local taxes? What are we in for there?
So you'll be looking at purchasing costs. I always say if you're around the €300,000 mark, allow for 7 to 8%. And that'll include notary fees, lawyers' fees, the big tax, which is the IMT tax. That's usually about 3.5 to 4%.
What's IMT?
So that's property transfer tax.
Right.
So that's the big one.
So that's like our stamp duty then?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So that's going to be what, 3 or 4%, you said?
3 or 4% on something that's 300,000. It does increase as the price goes up.
Steps up with the value of the property, does it?
Yeah. It's never normally, I've never known anyone pay more than 10%. That's including fees, and that's on €1 million purchase.
Okay. Now, I can only speak for Spain, but maybe I think the system is broadly similar. I mean, a lot of people I've dealt with in Spain don't use a lawyer. They simply just rely on the notary. Is that a standard practice, or would you recommend having a lawyer?
I would always recommend using a reputable lawyer and shop around and make sure they've got a good reputation. So yeah, I would always recommend using a lawyer.
I mean, if my understanding is right, the notary is not particularly interested in your interests. He's interested the property is what it is in the description. In other words, that the person giving it to you has got the legal right to do so. Mm-hmm. And that the proper taxes are paid to the government, and a notary in effect is a government employee, is he not?
Pretty much.
So, it's a bit of a mistake to think he's going to be acting your best interests all the way down the line, because he's not. And his focus is fairly limited, I think, if my understanding is correct. So a good lawyer, I presume they're relatively easy to find in the Algarve, and a lot of them will be real property specialists, won't they?
Yeah, there's some, we've been using some for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And they'll do a lot more. They'll connect your utilities, help you open a bank account, help you sign the mortgage paperwork, the notary. a will.
And as you mentioned earlier, they'll help you maybe with your visa,
Yes.
which is vitally important, isn't it? Do you find when people come over and they actually get into the process of buying, do you find that they're surprised at these extra costs, or are they pleased? Do they think it's reasonable value? Do you get a lot of questions on that?
Not really. I mean, we're very upfront about the extra costs. I know in the UK you've got buying fees as well. So yes, people are usually, it's pretty straightforward. You kind of have a larger upfront cost with Portugal, but then you have lower running costs throughout the time of the purchase.
Honestly, that's the way I would prefer it, I think. If you know what everything is up front, you get rid of it. And then if your ongoing costs are reasonable, it doesn't tend to take the pleasure away from your holiday, does it? Because that's what it's all about at the end of the day. Now, look, just finally, I think what I'd like to ask you is this. Spain, for instance, there are areas that you'll buy into, shall we say, invest in broadly a buy-to-let situation. So you perhaps take the place for a couple of weeks a year and the rest of the year you want to let it out. I presume the difference between investing and holiday homes is the same in Portugal. And I think my question is this. Do you find that people coming over to Portugal to invest, to just have that 2 weeks holiday and let out for the rest of the time, are they satisfied with their occupation rates? Does the return on investment work well?
It does. I mean, you have to be a little bit cautious about where you're buying. You have to make sure it's got a swimming pool, it's got them facilities that the rental clients would like. So it's a change of mindset.
Yeah.
I mean, for anyone who's looking to invest, I always say to them, explore the finance option. So mortgages as low as 2.9%. You can borrow 75% of the property value. So that de-risks the property. And, if you're an investor, you really want to use somebody else's money, but make sure you can cover them the first year's mortgage yourself. So don't expect a rental income straight away. Be a bit on the cautious side. And for the Algarve, I would explore a touristic development. So if you get a touristic development, it's a hands-off investment. You can normally they come with furniture, and there's a management company.
There are plenty of management companies about in those sort of areas.
This one's a Pacific management company.
What sort of occupation rate would you reckon to get over a year?
This year, I would say it's around about 55 to 75%, and it moves up throughout the years. And I've got clients who have got, up to 90% occupancy, but that takes 3 or 4 years to achieve.
I mean, it's one of the most widest known traps here. People buy to let, and they get the calculator out and say, right, 52 weeks a year at 500 quid a week. So I've got, hold on a minute, are you going to have it let 52 weeks a year? And the answer is no most times.
Well, the big thing that people are have overseen in the Algarve is that the typical buy to let, where you do a long-term let, actually works really well.
Yeah.
And the government's just dropped the rental tax from 28% to 10% to encourage more buy-to-let landlords. So that's a new thing this year.
Well, I think we're going the other way here, aren't we? I think the government's doing its best to knock any kind of individual landlord making money sort of right out. Taxes have gone up. We're going to have these new regulations which make it virtually impossible to get rid of your tenant. Now that's all very fine if you want a tenant long term, but I've often maintained, I think one of the things wrong with our country is that we're too slow with regulations and paperwork, and I think the leases that we had 20 years ago are just not suitable for today. I mean, I do a lot of property work, and I've said this many times on our programs. I've had people show me leases that they've got for buildings like these, 40, 50 stories, and it says you will clean your chimney at least once every 3 months and keep the lawns mowed, and what they've done, of course, they just cut and pasted things. So I think the final point that I want to make about your property letting, whether it be an actual investment or whether you're just dissipating your costs of a holiday home, how easy is it to let a property? Are there good internet letting agents on site, readily available, and are the costs of that expensive?
No, I mean, you pay a management fee, so it's normally around about 20 to 25% of the income. There's a lot of companies out there that are very open. They want your business, and can make it very easy for you. They speak English. They've got great websites. They use property channel managers, so appear on websites like Airbnb, Bookings.com, VBRO, and it's a very good business to be in.
Okay. Well, I'm going to thank our guests very much. That's Chris White and Carrie Marie Bratley from Ideal Homes Portugal for coming in today and answering all my questions. I've given you a bit of a grilling for an hour, but I think the information that you've given, I'm going to thank you for, because I'm sure it's invaluable to those that are interested in buying in Portugal, and I'm sure they'll be very grateful to have listened to what you've had to say. So thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you for having us.
I think you're flying back today, so good luck with that and safe journey. Join me again on Question Time next time. My name's Stephen Galpin. See you then.